He didn't need the money. He didn't need the fame. And that night, he didn't even need the steak. What Elijah Grant needed was the truth. Riverstone Grill had once been the gem of its neighborhood, a place where steaks sizzled and reservations were hard to get. But something had changed. Its shine had faded. Online reviews hinted at rudeness. Rumors whispered about employees quitting in silence. So Elijah didn't send an email or a manager. He went himself, quietly, undercover. He wore a gray hoodie pulled over his head, a worn pair of jeans, and shoes that had seen better days. He looked like a tired traveler. Nothing about him said, owner of a multi-million-dollar restaurant group. That was the point. That was the armor. On his backpack, a small rainbow pin caught the light when he stepped into the doorway. He noticed the way the hostess stared at it, just a second too long. "Table for one," he said, the name he gave Elliot Matthews. No traceable record. No headlines. Just another man looking for a warm meal. But the moment he stepped into the main dining room, he felt it. It wasn't the smell. The steak still smelled fine. The lighting still dimmed to the right shade of gold. It was the people, the way they moved, tense, rushed. No laughter behind the kitchen doors. No music from the bar. A young busboy flinched when the kitchen manager snapped at him. And the manager, Greg Simmons, if Elijah remembered correctly from the property documents, was barking orders loud enough for the diners to hear. The hostess returned from her station, leaned slightly closer to Elijah as she led him to the table, and muttered, "Not in this kind of place." Before glancing down at his backpack, the pin, Elijah smiled, polite, calm. He had seen that look before in locker rooms, in boardrooms, even once in his own family's living room. It didn't cut like it used to, but it still left a mark. He sat down at a corner table. No one offered water. The menu was sticky. He waited 5 minutes, then 10. At 15, a girl finally appeared, maybe 23, nervous eyes, a server's apron tied too tight, like she was afraid of falling apart. Her name tag read Ava. She apologized softly and took his order. Filet mignon, medium rare, side of seasonal vegetables. When she returned, her hands trembled just enough to make the plate rattle as she set it down. She leaned closer than necessary, and in one fluid motion, slid something beneath the plate. Elijah didn't react. He waited until she walked away, then pretended to reach for a napkin. It wasn't a napkin, it was a torn piece of order paper, folded twice, written in small, urgent handwriting. He watches the cameras. Please help us. For a moment, Elijah didn't move. His heart didn't race. His hands didn't shake. But deep in his chest, something shifted. He had come here thinking this would be a routine check. Just another failing restaurant with bad management. But this wasn't just poor service or broken systems. This was fear. This was a cry. He took a bite of the steak anyway. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't the point. What mattered now was what he did with that note. And who gave it to him? Because Elijah Grant wasn't just here to fix a business. He was here to fix what people like Greg had been allowed to ruin. He left the cash tip on the table, stood up quietly, and walked into the night. But inside him, something had been reignited. Something he hadn't felt in a long time. A responsibility, a memory, and a vow. If you want to know what happens when the man they underestimated comes back with the truth and the power to act, don't miss what comes next. Subscribe now to Heart Story, where every hidden truth has its moment in the light. Elijah didn't go home that night. He drove 6 blocks away, parked under a flickering street lamp, and opened his laptop in the quiet of his car. It was nearly midnight, and the glow of the screen was the only light in the darkness around him. As the city wound down outside, he logged into a private server. He had installed the backup system himself, weeks before the sale closed. A habit, a precaution. Elijah trusted people, but he trusted cameras more. Riverstone Grill had 16 cameras, but only 12 were active when he checked the feed that night. The other 4 had been manually disconnected. That told him enough already, but it wasn't what he saw live that mattered, it was what had already happened. He selected playback. 14 days, every hour, every corner. The footage began to unfold like a documentary no one was meant to watch. In the back hallway, Greg Simmons took cash tips from waiters and slipped them into his own pocket. He laughed with the bartender about rounding down credit card gratuities. He whispered instructions to clock employees out early before the guests had even finished their desserts. One video showed a server nervously approaching Greg about a misprinted check. Greg didn't answer with words. He grabbed the receipt, crumpled it, and muttered something under his breath. Elijah turned up the audio. "You people are lucky to even have a job." The next clip was harder to watch. A dishwasher, slim, quiet, with a slight tremor in his hands, was caught talking on the phone. When he hung up, Greg appeared behind him. No shouting, just a lean in, voice low, poison dripping from every syllable. "Keep that queer stuff at home." That same dishwasher was then assigned 4 hours of non-stop cleaning. Alone. The water ran, his hands bled. No one helped him. No one even looked his way. Elijah paused the footage. He stared into the frozen frame. His own reflection looked back from the screen, ghost-like in the window's glare. For a moment, it wasn't just about that boy anymore. It was about every boy who had been told their love made them lesser. About the silence that follows humiliation when everyone else just keeps working. He continued watching. Ava, the server who had passed him the note, appeared next. She stood near the kitchen entrance as Greg berated another host for seating weirdos in the front section. When Ava gently suggested the host was just doing her job, Greg snapped, "You want to clean toilets next week? Sweetheart, keep talking." The threat hung in the air. Ava fell silent. Her eyes dropped. Her hands folded in front of her like a child waiting for punishment. Elijah's fingers hovered over the keyboard. He wanted to scream. Instead, he took a breath and kept going. Near the end of the footage, one more moment pulled the air from his lungs. A young man, maybe a student, handed Greg a resignation letter. The camera caught everything. Greg didn't even read it. He smiled, tore the paper in half, and dropped the pieces in the trash. The boy stood there, still, defeated, then walked away. Alone. The timestamp was from 8 days earlier. Elijah closed his laptop without a sound. The silence inside the car had shifted. It wasn't peace anymore. It was fury wrapped in focus. What was happening inside Riverstone Grill wasn't mismanagement. It was cruelty. Systemic, intentional, sanitized abuse behind clean aprons and plated entrees. He looked out the windshield. The city hadn't changed, but he had. He had once promised himself at 22 years old, humiliated and unemployed for simply showing up with his boyfriend to a staff party, that if he ever had the power, he would protect the ones no one else saw. Now he had the power, and the proof, and a name, Greg Simmons. In the stillness of the car, Elijah whispered it like a verdict. This wasn't just going to be about fixing a restaurant anymore. This was about righting a legacy of wrongs. The next morning, the sky was overcast. Clouds hung low as if they knew what was about to unfold. Elijah Grant didn't dress in silence this time. He selected a black tailored suit, the kind that spoke for itself. Crisp collar, cufflinks engraved with his initials, and a pin on his lapel, not the rainbow on his backpack, but a polished silver one that once belonged to someone he lost. He didn't walk into Riverstone Grill alone. Behind him were 2 attorneys, sharp and prepared, and a 3-person HR team, ready to document every word. This wasn't revenge. This was justice. And justice didn't knock. It walked through the front door. Greg Simmons was in the kitchen, as usual, shouting, pacing, berating a line cook about timing and getting it together. He didn't notice Elijah at first. He barely looked up. But when he finally did, his voice caught in his throat. The arrogance drained from his face like water from a cracked glass. The man in the hoodie from last night, wasn't a customer after all. Elijah Grant, one of the lawyers said, loud enough for the kitchen to go quiet. Majority owner, effective 3 weeks ago. Greg opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Elijah didn't bother with small talk. He walked straight to the staff break room, where a portable screen had been set up in advance. He connected his laptop. No one spoke. The staff gathered quietly, curiosity growing in the air like a rising storm. And then Elijah hit play. The screen flickered to life. The kitchen, frozen in grainy black and white, played out like a confession. Greg's voice filled the room. These soft little fairies think the world owes them something. There were no gasps, just stillness, heavy, disbelieving. Greg took one step back, then another. But it was too late. The truth was out. It echoed through the room like a siren no one could silence. The lawyer turned to him. Mr. Simmons, you are terminated immediately for workplace abuse, tip fraud, wage manipulation, and repeated discriminatory conduct. Before Greg could react, a security guard had already stepped forward, calm, ready. Greg's hands twitched at his sides. This is ridiculous, he muttered. I built this team. I made this place run. Elijah looked him dead in the eye. His voice was quiet, but it cut deep. No, you broke it. You made it a place people feared walking into. You hurt people who trusted you. That ends now. Greg tried to speak again, but his words were swallowed by silence. One by one, the staff turned to watch him leave. Some stared, some looked down. But Ava, standing near the back wall, raised her hand to her mouth, not in fear, in disbelief. Her eyes filled with something between shock and quiet hope. The security guard opened the door. Greg walked out. And just like that, the tension inside Riverstone Grill broke. Elijah didn't celebrate. He didn't smile. He only stood there for a moment longer, scanning the faces of people who had endured too much, too quietly. He spoke only once more before ending the meeting. Starting now, this place will be what it was meant to be. Not perfect, but safe, fair, and loud enough to hear everyone. Some heads nodded, others didn't know how to react yet. Change felt like a new pair of shoes, too tight at first. But with room to grow, Elijah stepped back. The HR team stayed behind to begin one-on-one meetings. The attorneys filed documentation. But Elijah, he walked toward the front windows and looked out. The street looked the same, the city moved the same. But inside this restaurant, something had shifted. The man they dismissed as a stranger had just reclaimed his place, and the man they had feared was gone for good. The restaurant had never been this quiet, not even in the early mornings before the first order was fired. There was no shouting, no passive-aggressive slamming of trays, no tension that gripped the air like a wire stretched too tight. Just silence, and then footsteps, calm, purposeful. Elijah stood before them, not as a stranger, not as a mystery, but as the man who owned the walls around them. His voice, when it came, didn't echo. It didn't need to. I should have come sooner, he said. I watched too long, waited too long. For that, I'm sorry. Some nodded, others just watched. He took a breath. When I was 22, I brought my boyfriend to a company dinner. My manager pulled me aside before dessert and asked me to leave. Said it wasn't appropriate to bring a date like that. 2 days later, they let me go, said it was about budget, but I knew the truth. His hands rested on the edge of the service counter now, steady. I told myself back then behind me, if I ever had power, I'd use it for people like us. People who didn't have anyone else to speak up. The staff said nothing, but their stillness changed. Shoulders lowered, eyes softened. Elijah nodded toward a woman entering from the side office. The HR director stepped forward with the clipboard. Then 2 more followed, carrying envelopes. Each of you will be receiving the full amount of unpaid wages and tips owed. We've done the math. It goes back 4 months. A whisper of surprise moved through the crowd. On top of that, Elijah continued, You'll get a 3-month bonus. No strings attached. It's not a gift. It's what you were always owed. Then he turned to Ava, standing near the corner, eyes wide and hands still tucked into the folds of her apron. Ava, he said, you stood up when no one else did. You passed a message when it could have cost you your job. That took more than courage. It took conscience. He paused. I'd like to name you assistant manager, effective today. Gasps this time, real ones. Ava didn't speak, only covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes filling as she nodded silently. And to those of you who left, Elijah said, now facing the others, who were pushed out, silenced, shamed, we've contacted everyone we could find. Anyone willing to return will receive a renewed contract, a clean start, and free mental health support for 6 months. It wasn't a gesture, it was a structure, built on something real. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded document, placed it on the countertop. These are the new rules of Riverstone Grill, he said. Mandatory quarterly audits, management training on safe and inclusive workplaces. And one more thing, any employee who experiences harassment or discrimination will have a direct line to me. Not a manager, not HR, me. No one spoke for a moment. The weight of what had just been promised needed time to land. Then, quietly, someone clapped. A slow, unsure sound, then another, until it became a rhythm. A room that had lived in fear began, just slightly, to believe. Elijah didn't smile for the applause. He smiled for something smaller, softer, a feeling that maybe for once he'd kept a promise, not just to others, but to the boy he used to be, the one who was asked to leave, the one who stayed quiet when they fired him. He walked past the prep line, nodding to the dishwasher, who'd once been punished for a phone call. The boy met his gaze and didn't look away this time. Elijah didn't need banners or speeches. This was how change looked. Quiet, steady, real. A week passed. The restaurant began to breathe again. Customers noticed, not because of any statement or press release, but because something invisible had shifted. Kindness at the door, warmth in the kitchen, dignity in the air. Elijah returned most mornings. Not in a suit, just himself. Present, watchful. On Thursday afternoon, Ava approached him during prep. She wasn't nervous this time. She stood taller now, more grounded in the space she'd helped save, but her hands still held something close to her chest. Can I talk to you for a second? He nodded, stepping aside near the bar, where the hum of kitchen noise faded. I'm the one who wrote the note, Ava said, voice soft but steady. But I wasn't the first. From her apron pocket, she pulled a small bundle, folded papers, old order slips, crumpled napkins, sticky notes with handwriting smudged by time and grease, dozens of them. She laid them gently on the counter. They were hidden in the drawer under the register. I only found them last night when we were reorganizing. Elijah reached out slowly. Each note was a cry no one had heard. He threatened to fire me again. Please, if anyone sees this, I need help. He said I was disgusting. I didn't do anything. And then, near the bottom of the pile, a name stopped him. Michael G. The handwriting was neat, familiar. Elijah froze. Time didn't stop, but it thinned like light behind water. Ava didn't speak. She didn't need to. Michael, Elijah's first love. The boy who had made him believe being different wasn't something to hide. Michael had worked at Riverstone Grill years ago, part-time, while studying art history. Elijah had helped him get the job back when the place had a different name. They were just kids then, brave and foolish. And then one day, Michael had vanished. No warning, no note, no goodbye. Elijah had searched, called, emailed, silence. And eventually he had stopped looking. Told himself it must have been a choice, a change of heart, a different life. But now, holding this slip of paper, Elijah knew better. Ava whispered what she'd learned. Michael was fired. right after Greg found out he was gay. No formal report, just gone. No one ever heard from him again. Elijah didn't cry. His body stayed still, but something inside him unraveled. He stepped outside for air. The wind had picked up. Clouds moved fast overhead, casting shifting light onto the street. He looked up, not to the sky but through it. "Michael," he said quietly, "I hear you now. I didn't then, but I do now, and I won't let it happen again." The papers were scanned, stored, protected, a memorial of voices that had once been ignored. Inside, the restaurant was alive with motion cutlery clinking, staff laughing, Ava giving instructions with a confidence she hadn't possessed before. And Elijah stood among them, not above, among, because change isn't always loud. Sometimes, it starts with a single note passed under a plate, and sometimes it ends by honoring a truth buried in silence. If someone had left you a note like that, would you have read it or would you have walked away? Tell us in the comments below. And don't forget to follow Heart's Story, where every voice, no matter how quiet, deserves to be heard.